Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another session of Perspectives of Change. So as again, I'm going to introduce our show itself, and then we will dive right into the topic and our special guest for today. So the show itself, first, Perspectives of Change. Sometimes we forget that our perspective as change agents is just one of the many perspectives that we have out there. The Perspectives of Change show is dedicated to exploring how to nudge change forward by understanding and valuing multiple perspectives. Our topic for the show today is to discover the secrets to thriving teams. And we do this by unlocking the power of positive psychology. So whether you're a team leader, a manager, or just simply someone who wants to learn how to create a more productive team environment, I think this topic is going to be super, super, super relevant for any of you. And to give a lot of weightage to this topic, we have today a special guest with us, Ro Gorell, who joins us from
Perth in Western Australia.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a bit of a chilly Western Australia at the moment. We've had some really strange weather going through. We had torrential rain on Tuesday when it's quite chilly, hence why I'm sat here with my scarf on. So
interesting weathers, right? I've got my air conditioner on with the cold air, and you've got the heat on there. So global environments that we live in. Interesting.
Yes, change.
Indeed it is. So Ro, I'd love for you to, share a little about yourself and introduce yourself for our listeners.
Fantastic. So you probably spotted from my accent, I'm not originally from Australia. So originally from the UK, and I moved here just over 11 years ago. 11 years this month it was, in fact. And I started life doing many things, but one of my main jobs when I started my career was in human resources, or personnel management, as we called it then. And that was where I got very interested in the whole topic of change, and particularly around people change. So when you're making changes, structural changes in the organization, we acquired a lot of staff. So how do you go through those kind of changes? And as I've gone through my career, I've got very much more interested in how we use coaching to enable that change process. There was always an element of coaching in what I did in HR, because essentially you were always having one-on-ones with conversations with people. So you were naturally having that coaching conversation. So it kind of evolved from that. And over the years, I've written a number of books. I've written 2 books with my fellow writing colleague, Gillian Jones-Williams, who's also based in the UK. So our first book together was on coaching tools, so 50 top coaching tools, and that's still going strong. We're on our 5th edition of that. We then wrote together how to create a coaching culture, because we both very much advocates for coaching as a way of helping people develop. And personally, I also like working with teams and groups. I wrote a book on group coaching, wrote a book on talent management, and then my latest book, which I will unashamedly mention, is coaching self-organizing teams. And I know that you bought a copy of that as well. So
yes. And just for our listeners out there on the podcast, I just want to mention, so it's an awesome book. It's called Coaching Self-Organizing Teams, Helping Teams Flourish. So if you want to grab a copy, it's not a promo, but I think it's a really valuable book for teams. So go grab it.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and I know from the people who've read it, because the key reason we write is so that people will read and give feedback, and hopefully that it will be useful. And I know that from the people who've given me feedback and have written reviews, they found it really useful, particularly people working in the agile space. So of course it's self-organizing teams. It doesn't necessarily mean it's only for agile environments, because of course other environments have self-organizing teams, as I mentioned in the book. However, I think for those people working in agile environments, I know that they found it useful, and they've gone to the book when they've been challenged with something that's happening in the team. They've gone to the book and said, oh, what do I need to do here? So I know that it is very practical as well, which is what I always love. I like that pracademic. You've got the research and also the practical application of what the research is telling us.
Indeed it is. Yeah, I would agree. And just on that context, right? In fact, In fact, I think for me, the way I see your experience, Ro, it's quite similar to mine in the sense that you've been moving in the world, right? You've moved all the way from UK to Australia. So change is, in a way, a little inherent to you. And I remember reading this book, and that triggers my question. Help us understand the context of how you view change itself, because, change is quite an abused word in today's context. I'm just curious, how would you contextualize change for us as a context before we get into the other topics?
Yeah. So it's a really good question, and that was when I was writing this particular chapter around change, I was thinking about, well, how have I described change in the past? And how have I made sense of change? And so the way that and there's a little diagram in the book where I sort of describe this, and it is kind of three types of change that I think of. That transactional change, which is very much around, we need to implement something, or there might be a compliance change. So it's very transactional. And I was thinking, because I wrote this during COVID, I guess most of it was written during COVID. And I was thinking about, my own experiences of moving to Windows 10, which was not pleasant. But that's a transactional change. It's something that's, that you turn the handle and you know what you're doing and you just get on with it. And then there's something that I call transitional change, where it's a bit more than that. So the example that I've given is, if you think about what happened in COVID, a lot of teams moved from the office to working remotely. And some organizations that had been really battling to get MS Teams in suddenly were presented with the need to actually drive that change. And so that move to the technology of MS Teams then helped create that sort of remote working. So it was a transitional change, because it then introduced this notion that people could work remotely. What a surprise. We never knew. And obviously, as we're coming out of the pandemic, it's kind of, well, hang on a minute. People were able to deliver stuff and be productive, in fact, very productive during COVID. Productivity levels generally didn't actually go low. In some cases, they actually improved. So that's kind of what I see as a transitional change. It's almost like there's a catalyst that's creating that change. And then the final one, and I actually got asked this on a course recently, what's transformational change? And one thing I didn't talk about there, but I do talk about in the book, is my background is I studied classics as my first degree. And there's an awesome book called Metamorphosis, which is all about change. And for me, transformational change is where you change your identity. So what does that mean in organizational terms? Well, obviously the book is about self-organizing teams. So that would be a transformational change. If you were going from a hierarchical, functional based team to one that was cross-functional and self-organizing, that has ultimately changed the identity of the business. And if we think about agile ways of working and agile generally, done well, that actually transforms a business, because of course all the support systems and everything that go around the organization will, by virtue of the fact that you're adopting agile ways of working, adopting the principles of agile, it will change those things. So that's kind of it's almost like the evolution of change, that you've got a small change, which then potentially could become that transitional change, which then catalyzes that complete identity switch. And obviously things like changing your business strategy, changing your business model, all of those things will transform the way you interact with your customers. Because at the end of the day, a business doesn't exist unless it has customers. So ultimately, it's what is the impact on the end customer and why are you making that change?
Awesome. No, I love those contexts and the differentiation amongst the three, because that's really critical for us to, whether it's just a transaction, it's done and dusted and that's it, or is it going to enable you to become something that you're meant to be in a big way? And that's how, you get to the transformation piece. And I haven't read that book, Metamorphosis. I need to pick that up. Okay, cool.
It's a very, very nice read. It's a very pleasant read. Don't read it in Latin, because I tried that. It was really hard to read it in the translated English.
Okay. But then I'm curious, because you do talk about, and our talk today is also focused around the role of the team coach in guiding teams through change. And I'm I'm thinking that's probably the transformational change that you want to guide teams through. So help us understand what's with the role of the team coach in this context.
So yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think it's probably at the moment team coaching is probably still in that early evolution stage. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite yet understood, and what it tends to default to is facilitation and mentoring. It tends to default to that. And when we're acting as a team coach, what we're actually doing is helping the team create that environment in which they can become something different. So by virtue of that, it's not going to be a short-term fix. So what we're doing is as we're helping the team work through that, we're handing over the coaching process to them gradually. So it kind of does follow that transactional thing. You know, when you're starting off coaching, you might be doing transactional stuff with the team. You know, you might be doing questionnaires. You might be doing a bit of facilitation because you want to get the ball rolling. And then as you transition, you know, the team starts to go, well, hang on a minute, don't we need to do this? And they then start to become the coach for themselves. And then when they've made that transformation, you as the coach basically are not doing anything. You're just being present and observing the coaching process. And then that is when you transition out of the team. And obviously they can call you back in for specific things. But the idea is that you take them on that evolutionary journey where you give just enough structure in that transactional stage so that they feel comfortable with what they're doing, and you hold their hand as you coach them through. And that simple things like, you know, the kinds of questions you're asking, putting the responsibility back on the team to collectively solve problems for themselves. So you're not there to solve the problems for them. You're not going in with a process that says, oh, I've seen one of these before, I know how I can fix that. You're actually helping the team do that. So you can tell this is what I love doing. I love talking about it. It's amazing watching a team going through that process and hearing them then starting to ask those questions for themselves, and of their stakeholders. So yeah, it's that evolutionary journey.
Nice. I might be jumping a little forward, but I still want to ask, because how does positive psychology then get into this team coaching? Tell us more. I think it's a couple questions forward, but I still want to ask it.
Yeah, so I have got a couple of graphics to show, because I did promise people some tools and ideas. And I did say to you before we started talking today that I do have a tendency to go down rabbit holes because I just get so excited by my topic. So I'm going to keep myself honest and look at my notes as well, just to make sure I give what people have come to listen for. So yeah, so positive psychology for me, why I've included it in the book is because, you know, if you think about all of the challenges that we're grappling with, both at work and the stuff that we bring into work, when you're in a team, those things are always present. And so what we're not there to do as coaches is we're not therapists. However, we do need to have some tools, techniques, resources, resourcefulness, so that we can help the team develop a firm foundation on which to build that coaching muscle. So this is not about fixing the team. It's not about therapizing the team. It's about helping the team help itself with strategies and tools that we know have a basis in social science, in psychology. So that's what it's about. And positive psychology and I apologize to anybody who specializes in this. I'm really trying to get to the essence of what it is. For me, positive psychology is that sort of being comfortable in your skin and having that firm foundation, that you have confidence that things, even when things get tough, even when things get rough, you have the wherewithal to actually cope with that, and that you ultimately believe that everything is going to be okay, and that you have the ability to do stuff that will help it be okay. So as I say, apologies to anybody who is an expert in positive psychology, but for me, working with teams, that's where I want them to get to, so that they don't feel buffeted by the tides of fortune. They're actually sailing the ship for themselves. And that's obviously, that then goes hand in hand with what I said before about being able to coach themselves as well. Right. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. And it's all about self-organizing at the end of the day, right? You want them to be self-organizing. So that's key.
Spot on. Spot on. Yeah, perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Tell us a little more about, you talked about how they cope with these changes. So how does the team get into, these? Would you get them to look at tools to cope with this, or tell us more?
So may I share one of my photos of a little diagram that I came up with? So I basically, it was good for me because it made me read my book again, and that chapter in particular. And what I did was I came up with a graphic that kind of hopefully captures the key points, and then I can sort of expand or not depending on the level of interest. So what I've got here are sort of the 4 key concepts that I have in the chapter. The first one is about fearless learning. So this fits very well with the sort of the temperature of the world at the moment around, being comfortable when things don't go well, being comfortable speaking up. And it's based on learner anxiety that Edgar Schein talks about in his books around change. And what this means is it means making it okay for people to learn something new and also to unlearn stuff that they've maybe been doing for a while. Because oftentimes what gets in the way of us changing, whether it's at work, whether it's in our personal lives, is that we think we might not be able to do it. We don't want to look stupid if we can't do it. So it's also, and it's kind of linked to the third one as well, but it's about that self-efficacy, that belief and confidence that, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be working with the team around. And so I'm just going to go through them individually, and then I'll come back to the tools. So before I go on, Sarika, is there anything that you think would be useful to dig into deeper on that?
For me personally, I think the number 4 is key because that's
okay.
So yeah, deliberate practice. So when you come to that, I think I'd love to dive a little bit more into that.
Okay, cool.
Personally, because I coach teams, so I think the importance and the value and significance of that is tremendous.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to bring your perspectives into it. So, but everything here is awesome. So just go on.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go to deliberate practice then, because that kind of is linked to that fearless learning that, there's been a lot in the press around this, the sort of the 10,000 hours, which clearly, if you're doing something wrong for 10,000 hours, all it means is you're going to get better at doing it wrong. So deliberate practice is about really getting clear on what is the best approach, and then practicing that best approach. And as a musician, this makes absolute sense to me. So, for example, if I'm learning a piece of music and there are a few bars that I'm stumbling over, then I will take those pieces of the music and I will look at what it is I'm getting wrong. So it could be that I'm getting the time wrong. It could be, if I'm playing the piano, it could be that I've got the wrong fingers, so the notes don't sit underneath the hand properly. It could be 101 things. And similarly, if you go to the gym and you do weights, you want those cues, like you bend at the hip, you keep a straight back, you keep your shoulders over the bar if you're doing a deadlift. All of these cues then help you understand how you do something better. Right. So that deliberate practice is about making sure that what you're doing is working well and then practicing it consciously. So there's something in coaching where we talk about the sort of the 3 reflections, which is pre-reflection. So you think about what you're going to do before you do it. You then are in the moment, you're reflecting on it. So you're being very present in the moment and you're being mindful about what you're doing. And then after you've done it, you're then doing that reflective practice to think, okay, what went well? What didn't go so well? What could I do better? And so when we're coaching teams, what we're doing is we're actually creating that deliberate practice. So, you know, we might pre-frame a conversation, or the team might pre-frame a conversation, and we might say, okay, so what is it we're hoping we're going to get out of this conversation? What do you want to take away from the conversation? What are going to be the key learning areas that you want to focus in on? And then they're having the conversation, and obviously you're asking questions and listening, and maybe not asking questions. You might be reflecting back to what you're hearing as well. At some point you will say, well, hang on, can we just put a pause in there? Let's just reflect on what's happening in the moment. So you're doing that in process reflection. And then when the conversation comes to a natural close, you then are asking, okay, so what did you observe about that conversation? What were you feeling? What senses were what sense were you getting out of that conversation? So that's how we use that deliberate practice in a coaching space, that we're doing that in and out of the moment.
Love that. The intentional reflection. It's amazing. And yes, yeah, I just love that. So I get this perfectly and resonates very well. So I'm just hoping that our listeners and viewers can also, see the benefit of doing that deliberately, whether it's, something that you just start off, but be intentional about that. And take it from there, and continuous reflection, feedback, and then keep updating your learning. So you're just going to get better. Yeah. It can get worse. So
yeah. And the same for you as a coach. You're doing that constantly while you're coaching, because you're noticing what's going on in the room. You're noticing what's going on in you. You're noticing what might be coming into the room that the team are either consciously aware of or unconsciously aware of. So what parallel processes might be going on in the team that they're bringing into the room. And you can see this many times when you're training. You can sense that, by the type of conversations that people are having, who they're talking about, how they're talking about them. You get that system sense coming into the room. So for me, that deliberate practice is really, really important, both for us as coaches and for the team as they're going through that coaching process. And that deliberate practice also hopefully helps them with that fearless learning as well. Yeah. Because, hopefully they'll see what they're actually learning. So again, I'm going to throw some tools in here. So, the learning process, you could start by using some of the solutions focused coaching questions, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at the moment in relation to this particular topic that we're talking about? And then you have the topic, they might go away, you might come back at the next session and you remind them, okay, so in the last session, you kind of were scoring yourselves along this. It sounds as though you've done a lot of work, from what you've been saying, there seems to have been some progress. So where do you rate yourselves now as a team on that continuum? And so that then leads into the next one, which is hopefulness, because hopefully they will see either progress or they will have learned something. If they haven't progressed along that scale, you can then ask the question, well, what's been better since we last met?
Right.
So you're constantly, when I'm coaching, I didn't actually realize it until I sat down and did this today. And obviously I must know it because that's what I wrote about. But I guess I'm doing this all the time when I'm coaching, either one-on-one or when I'm coaching in a team. When I'm training, when I'm delivering training, I'm doing this as well. Because for me, this is it's about making people feel okay and normalizing stuff for them so that they feel confident and have that self-efficacy. So that deliberate practice and that fearless learning then feeds into that hopefulness, which is that, all situations are temporary. This is the current reality today. It might not be the current reality tomorrow or the next day. So it's giving that reality check and just making it normal for things to be as they are, and that's as they are.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not stopping you right now. Keep going.
Okay, thought you were going to make a point, so I was just stopping there just to give you
just go
a chance to actually to comment. So that hopefulness is about I can do stuff. So it's about helping them understand. So the situation that you're in at the moment, have you ever encountered this situation as a team in the past? And if they have, then so what did you do about it? What did you learn? What can you, of that learning, what can you bring into the situation today? So it's kind of showing them that they have dealt with this kind of stuff in the past and it's okay. And, you know, yeah, things might be bad at the moment. There's always tomorrow, you know, that famous song from Annie, tomorrow. And I do use humor in my coaching as well. So, you know, you might want to even play the song just to change the energy in the room.
Sure.
You know, it's you've got so many tricks up your sleeve as a coach. You can practically do anything. And I'll come back to that one in a minute because I've got another little tool that I really like, which I know that Martin Seligman and others have mentioned in their writing as well. And then that final one, which is creating agency. And this is about, you know, when we're working with teams, and you know from your training as well, Sarika, that, you know, people always feel, well, we don't control anything. You know, it's the people above us who control stuff. All we're doing is being swept along by the tide. And it's like, well, let's just time out on that. Okay, so let's just have a go at thinking about all of the things that are happening at the moment, and you brainstorming all the things that are happening, and then, you know, okay, so put in a pile on this side. What are the things that you could do something about? You know, really think hard. If you really tried hard, what could you do? So put those there. We're not going to do anything at the moment with that. Just let's put them there. And then all the things that you really feel you can't do anything about, we'll put them to one side. And then go to the things that you can do stuff about. And then, okay, right, you've got 10 seconds to come up. And this is where you might go into facilitation mode. I don't know. I'm just thinking on the fly here. But then you would get them to think about, okay, so let's think about all the things that you could actually do that could actually be helpful and make you feel as though you've got some control over your own destiny. And you might then preface all of that with a conversation about how that's making them feel, what's driving it, you know, who the stakeholders are. You could have a coaching conversation about that as well. You don't have to go into a process mode. It's just recognizing that sometimes you might want to do that if the context is telling you that that's going to work, and you don't know until you're in it. So it's all about helping the team realize that they do have control over things. It's just that they are allowing their thinking patterns to get in the way of realizing that they've got that agency.
I love that point. And I do want to add a point here. So just talking about one of my recent engagements, there was a lot of change fatigue that was happening across the leadership team, the team that was driving the change. But at the same time, they also felt that they were not in control of many things. And we did, let's say, a similar but not exactly the same kind of an activity just for them to feel how much they've actually been in control of, and that they've actually navigated that change and nudged it forward enough for everyone to be a part of it. So sometimes I think people just go low on all that energy and feel that they don't control anything. But you're doing so much that I think staying amidst all of that, you just feel drowned with it, and there's so much fatigue. And I'm like, let's do a simple activity. Let's figure out, what do you think you have in control and what's out of your control? Similar, but where do you think you've involved all the people, and what have you actually completed? You know, because they felt nothing's moving. We're just stuck. We're not going anywhere from it. So you just reminded me of that very same thing. And that was like just a few months ago. But I so very much resonate with that. And I'm sure my teams can too. And they were like, oh, wow, we've done actually a lot of work. Gosh, didn't feel like that. Just drowning with it. So,
yeah. And that's a beautiful entree into the stuff that I found out when I was doing research for this chapter around learned helplessness. And I know for those people who specialize in positive psychology, it's not going to be any surprise to them, but it was to me, because when Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer did their 50th year, I think it was 50th year review. I'd love to check my Learned Helplessness at 50. Yeah, Insights from Neuroscience. That was the paper that they wrote in 2016. They actually found that something around that learned helplessness, that was actually our default setting. So we're designed to go in, when we're overwhelmed, and I guess it makes sense because when you're overwhelmed and you just need to regroup. So it's then, how do you get yourself out of that downward spiral? And it's exactly what we've just talked about there. It's about saying, okay, so just think of one thing that you can actually do that is going to move you out of this state. Doesn't matter how small it is. What's one thing that you can actually do that will give you a different perspective on what's actually happening? And so that's where they obviously got this learned optimism or hopefulness from, that if you can actually realize that all situations are temporary and you can do stuff about it, then that's where we want to get the team to. And your example there is a brilliant example of that, because you often, when we take stock, and again, it's that deliberate practice, isn't it? It's about reflecting and thinking, well, actually, we have done some really good stuff. And we do discount as well. Even coaching one-on-one is full of conversations I've had where people discount what they've done. Oh, well, it was only, or it was just this, or I'm only this. It's like, whoa, let's just stop for a moment.
That's so much. Applaud for it, just pat yourself on the back for something that you've done so well. I think it's just human nature, like you also said. I mean, this term, learned helplessness, honestly, that's new for me. So thank you for that.
Okay.
I actually didn't know that, there was something, but I'm going to read that paper that you talked about, the insights on.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
That's cool.
It's got all the science in there as well. So as those who've followed me for a while and know me, you know that I'm becoming more and more a bit of an irritant around evidence-based practices. So I apologize for anybody I might have offended in the past. I do get on my horse about that, because I want to know. I've always been inquisitive from a young child. I drove my parents mad, always asking why is that? I want to understand. So for me, evidence-based practice is one of those things that helps me make sense of stuff, and also be open-minded to review stuff that unlearning process, that maybe I've known stuff for a long time and I'm quite old now. Is it true? Does it still hold true? Is the evidence still there to support beliefs and views that I had when I was growing up, when I was learning in my early career? Are those things still valid? Yes or no? And that evidence-based approach, and I'm by no means perfect, it just keeps me honest.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I know this conversation, not just you going into a rabbit hole. I'm sure I can now take this into a rabbit hole myself, but let's not go there together. Let's, just in the interest of time, of course, I want to definitely still cover one key point, right? We're talking of teams, we're talking of coaching, we're talking of guiding teams through this whole context of change. And we all know this amazing word that is called the mindset. So, we talk about agile teams, we talk about the growth mindset, but it's not just about agile teams. It's about the human nature of the mindset. And I guess Carol Dweck sums it up in her brilliant ways in, all that learning that I've at least been learning from her. But tell us, Ro, tell us something more about how have you, I don't know, maybe even brought this growth mindset into your context of coaching, or how do you see the role of a coach in bringing out this growth mindset in people? Or maybe even before that, let's step back. Is growth mindset a thing? And if so, what is it? I mean, we both know the answers, but I think it'll be something good to start with, just setting a little context.
So I'm glad you phrased it like that, because so first of all, full disclosure, I came across Carol Dweck's work in, I think it was like 2009, 2010, something like that. And I was writing a short book on talent management. And I had this hypothesis that at the time, McKinsey was going on about the war for talent and treating talent as though it was a scarce resource. And my view was the polar opposite of that, that talent exists everywhere. You just need to look for it. And so that was how I got into Carol Dweck and others. David Rock, I was also really loved his book on the brain at work. And I read Howard Deutsch's book on brain plasticity. So for me, that growth mindset became a real beacon of hope, because the study goes something like this, that intelligence isn't fixed, that we can actually develop our abilities and talents regardless of IQ. Was in a very small nutshell, that's what it states in a very small nutshell. And I apologize to Carol Dweck for summarizing it thus, because it is a massive piece of work, and I think it created a lot of brilliant conversations. That since then, there's been a lot more research done, and in the book I talk about some of the contrary evidence around the growth mindset, and the fact that this concept of being able to grow your intelligence perhaps isn't as stated or as understood. And I know that Dweck herself says that the nuances of her research really, I mean, it's the same with any academic. You produce papers and research, and then the media takes a snapshot and it doesn't contextualize the whole of the research. So I feel for her, because I guess some of the nuances of her work has been lost in translation. So, we do have to be balanced and say you need to look at the research on both sides of the coin. However, putting that to one side, what I love about the growth mindset is that it links very nicely with psychological safety. In psychological safety, it's about feeling that you can speak up and say when things are going wrong. And the growth mindset is similar in that it says, you won't always get perfection. You won't always pass things first time round. You won't always be good at stuff. And that's okay. Because guess what? And I talk about this phrase in my group coaching book, we're perfectly flawed. That's what human beings are. If we weren't that way, we wouldn't be able to learn. We wouldn't be able to create connections in the way that we do. It's part of what makes us human. So I love it because it enables us to embrace all of that humanity and say, when we work together in teams, it's never going to be perfect. There is never going to be a perfect team. Even high-performing teams squabble. And if they don't, then pretty soon their performance is going to dip off, because they will get into that unconscious competence state where they can't learn and they can't unlearn, more importantly. And when we know life doesn't stay the same. So if you've got a team that's performing now, if circumstances change and they've reached that state, the chances are they're not going to be able to unlearn quick enough to then adapt to those changing circumstances. So that's a huge way of saying that having a growth mindset where you're okay with things not being perfect the first time round and you can learn, that is what we want in teams, because we're working in those complex adaptive systems where things constantly shift and change. So that's what I'll say. Sarika, I'm going to let you butt in and give me your thoughts.
No, it's so beautifully said. I don't want to change a single word there. So I'm not going to add more. Or maybe, how do I want to? No, I think it's just so beautiful. I just don't want to change it. So you reminded me of a lot of those Carol Dweck lessons that I've been learning, and, also bringing those to my teams. And, it leads to a lot of the experimentation pieces, how people think around that it's not bad. You can just fail and learn. I think the learning is so important, and it's not so negative. Of course, the context matters in every way. I'm not saying, fly or flight and just fail and, that's not what I'm saying. But I think it's really important, and always reminds me of one of Carol Dweck's TED Talks, was it, if I'm not mistaken, where for the first time she talked about a school somewhere in the US, and I think somebody had not passed, and instead of saying fail on their report card or reporting, what they'd said is, you're not there yet. It was not yet there. And that's such a big difference that it makes in how a person receiving that embraces that and says, oh, it's not yet, so I still can, right? because it's just not yet. I still can.
Yeah.
But if I say you failed, it's like, oh my God, I'm good for nothing. I just can't do it anymore. It's such an impact to my own mindset, right? So I think everything you said just reminded me of this and more. So
that's brilliant. Yeah, love it. Love it. Yeah. And so when I first started coaching, I like this phrase, and it was brilliant, and it's quite robust in its sort of metaphor that you the only time you failed is when you're dead.
Oh, nice. I love that. Oh,
because you still, if you're still alive, you're still in the game, you still got an opportunity to change things. And so it kind of reminds me of Ted Lasso. I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso, the Apple TV. I love it. Yeah. And so many of the things that he does there are just, apart from they're just brilliant in terms of team coaching. A lot of what he does there with the team is just so fantastic. And things like have the memory, be a goldfish, don't worry about stuff, move on, kind of thing. And that's also that growth mindset. Don't spend time analyzing why you're rubbish and why it's gone wrong. And of course, when things go catastrophically wrong, you need to understand so you can learn, but don't go into that downward spiral because of one thing that's happened. And I love that reminder about Carol Dweck's story on the pass fail scenario. Yeah.
Awesome. So this talk has been this conversation's been amazing so far. And like I said, I would rather just get into that rabbit hole, but we're going to now start summing it up. And
yes,
given the topic that we have for today, discovering the secrets to thriving teams, I would like us to wrap it up with hearing Ro give us, I don't know, maybe top 2 or 3 secrets that come up as tangible secrets that our listeners and viewers can think about. How can they, build their thriving teams by unlocking the power of positive psychology?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and I'll go back to it, and on the slide that I had before, I had PS at the bottom because that's psychological safety. And I did that as a PS because it's, remember, psychological safety is the foundation that creates this climate for the team. So thriving teams, in my view, have got that psychological safety. I've worked with some really robust teams in my time, and the ones that work the best are those where they've got that really sort of open conversation. And from the outside looking in, you think that seems a bit scary because they're having really quite challenging conversations. But they're good mates and they get on well together and they trust each other. They've got each other's backs. They're just able to have those kind of very, very honest and open conversations. And to me, that's, it's like a really well-functioning family in that sense, that you love everybody, but you might hate some of the things they do because they really get on your nerves. But it's okay because you've still got their back. You're still in it together. So that psychological safety is the cornerstone of everything for me. And then that then helps you build on the other stuff, because then people can be honest about what's really going on for them. So being open and honest with each other about what's really going on in the room. Because if you do that, then you can head off things at the pass. And then on the other side of the coin, it's that willingness, as you mentioned earlier, that willingness to really go, yes, we are doing well. We have done these things. Let's remind ourselves. So that ability to celebrate what the team is doing well and giving that appreciation. One of the best things I've ever facilitated, so I wasn't coaching, but it kind of went into a coaching mode, was with a team. And it started off as a really standard development day. And we ended the day where they were just going around and saying what they appreciated about each other. And in that moment, it then got really real because people started to really share why they appreciated each other. And it was just an amazing thing to be part of, seeing this team really, really appreciate each other. So they would be my top 3.
Awesome. Love them. Love all of them. So thank you so much, Ro, for these amazing secrets to thriving teams. And I do hope that our listeners and viewers have had a chance to grab some nuggets So if you're not really listening in right now or watching us right now, I'm sure you could, as soon as we put this video out there and the podcast out there, and tell us in the comments what were your takeaways. And if you'd like to reach Ro Gorell for anything at all, I'm going to have her email or the connect of LinkedIn just in the show notes below. So feel free to reach out to her. She's just human and she will respond to you. So I can assure you of that. And thank you all for listening again. And I will see you on the next podcast really soon. Bye for now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye.